Hey everyone! So, over the weekend, I finally got a chance to try out Mario Party Jamboree Switch 2 Edition. Longtime viewers of my channel will know that I'm pretty big on Mario Party. It was actually the first massive retrospective project that I ever took on in this channel, and it's a franchise that I never really walked away from, even during the dark times. Two of the games that I have played most throughout the past few years with my small circle of gamer family and friends was Mario Party Jamboree and Mario Party Superstars. Admittedly, we did get a little bit burnt out by Jamboree over the past few months, but I guess after playing Superstars and Jamboree at least once or twice a week over the course of like 2 years, it was bound to happen eventually. Well, anyway, over the course of this past weekend, we met up for a game night and somebody happened to own Mario Party Jamboree Switch 2 Edition. It was funny because this particular person is very strict about having physical games. So what they did was sell their physical copy of Jamboree Switch 1 Edition for like $40 and then find a used copy of the Switch 2 Edition for $60, so they still paid $20 for the upgrade, but they did it without putting money into the Nintendo store because they wanted physical ownership. That's not really relevant to the story here, but I thought it was an interesting workaround to keep physical ownership without dropping $80 on this new title. So I remember that Mario Party Jamboree was a very controversial Switch 2 Edition title because pretty much everybody was complaining about it. And in general, this might be a hot take, but I think that Switch 2 Editions are one of the worst things about the Nintendo Switch 2 era. I personally think they're worse than game key cards, and that's mainly because game key cards, as horrible as they are in concept, as long as they're not touching first-party titles, it doesn't really matter all that much because, right, the bread and butter of Nintendo is first-party titles. But Switch 2 Editions, and all of the scummy things that happen around them, directly affect first-party games, and could have a pretty bad impact on not only what we saw in the previous generation with the Switch 1, but also what we can expect to come and when we could expect stuff to come for the Switch 2. And quite frankly, I don't think there's been a single Switch 2 Edition game that has dropped without some kind of controversy. Now, from day one, I've viewed Switch 2 Editions for what they are. They're lazy cash grabs and justifications for Nintendo to keep their last-gen console games at full price in order to make an $80 price tag for a brand new game look appealing for the masses, because if you add up the $60 that you would spend on this 7-year-old game, then it's meant to convince people that a $20 upgrade pack is nothing more than DLC. So these are basically $80 ports with a $20 upgrade path, when in reality, by now, those games should cost $20 or $30. So the Switch 2 Edition titles should all be like $50 or $60 max. I've been saying they're this generation's Wii U ports since back in April. It's nice to see so many other channels mention the exact same thing now. And similar to the Wii U ports that we saw during last generation, it also means that whenever we see a new game come out and get a Switch 2 Edition upgrade, it likely makes people think that we're not going to be getting a game in that franchise anytime soon. This is basically what caused so many people to scratch their heads about the most recent Animal Crossing Switch 2 Edition announcement, because I think it made people realize that a new Animal Crossing game is not nearly as close as they might have expected going into the launch of this new title. For Kirby, Mario Party, Mario Wonder, and I guess technically even Metroid and Pokemon ZA, having Switch 2 editions for those games make a lot of sense for a lot of people because I don't think they expected any sequels anytime soon. But Animal Crossing is a much older title, so seeing a Switch 2 edition coming to Animal Crossing does raise some question marks for a lot of fans of the franchise. But there's another problem with Animal Crossing specifically, and I kind of went into it already in my last video, but the Switch 2 edition does not offer anything of value. It's $5, and all that does is slightly upscale the resolution. And most people would agree by now that the whole point of buying the Nintendo Switch 2 was to play your Switch 1 games on a better device. That was what everybody was trying to say was the justification for it. So paying that $500, getting your new device, and then having to pay $5 in addition to that is a bit scummy and against what most people expected going into this console. It's the same concept of what we saw with the two Legend of Zelda titles that came out earlier on, where the Switch 2 edition provided nothing but a frame rate and resolution bump, but you still had to pay $10 additional for those titles, which, need I remind you, for Breath of the Wild was $10 in addition to the $60 price tag that it still had, despite it being an 8-year-old game at the time. And oh yeah, this new $70 price tag for Breath of the Wild did not include the $20 DLC. And then of course, Tears of the Kingdom is a launch title for the Switch 2 and it's an $80 game. Now, going into this, a lot of people assumed that if there was just going to be a simple upgrade, it would be $10 for a Switch 2 edition title, but you could avoid paying that $10 if you had Nintendo Switch Online, because that's what the two Zelda games had. People were saying it was free, even though it's not really free because you have to pay for NSO, but you'd get the Switch 2 edition versions of those games, and many people had assumed that going forward, that's kind of the plan that Nintendo would take here. As long as you were a subscriber, you would probably be able to access these Switch 2 editions for free. It's the same song and dance we did with the Switch 1 when there were certain DLCs that were included with Nintendo Switch Online's expansion pass. So everybody was like, oh yeah, this is Nintendo being customer friendly. As long as you're a subscriber, you're going to end up getting these DLCs for free. Of course, they did it for 2 or 3 of them and then never did it again. I'm guessing this is the same concept. It was just a launch thing for the 2 Zelda titles where you would be able to upgrade for free, quote unquote. But in fairness, I mean, with the Zelda titles, you did have that option. That NSO subscription did effectively save you the $10 upgrade that you would have paid. For Animal Crossing, nope, you want that resolution bump, you're paying that extra $5. If you go to the store and you're going to buy Animal Crossing, which is a 5-year-old game, you're paying above full price now. This is a $65 Switch 1 game with a slight resolution bump. And if you take away that Switch 2 edition thing, you're still paying $60 for an old Switch 1 game, and that's still very awful, and I can't believe people just like to gloss past the fact that Switch 1 stuff has yet to go down in price, because quite frankly, that's as big of an issue for me as the whole Switch 2 debacle has been all along. Now with Animal Crossing, you got a massive update that was provided for free for anybody that's already bought the game. This includes Switch 1 and Switch 2 versions. This normally would have been locked behind a Switch 2 edition, as we saw with Kirby and the Forgotten Land, for example. If you owned Kirby and the Forgotten Land on the Switch 1, you didn't have a Switch 2, you can't play Starcrossed World. That's not the case here. And quite frankly, it's just confused everybody because now it's anybody's guess as to what the Switch 2 editions are going to provide going forward. But at the very least, everybody can still pretty much be certain that the $500 they spent on this new console in order to play their Switch 1 games at a better resolution and frame rate will be locked behind a paywall as long as the Switch 2 edition is involved. So for example, even if you don't want to play Starcrossed World on Kirby, you have to pay additional money in order to get the 60 frames per second. This is not something that's included with the purchase of your Switch 2. Now, Mario Party is considered the worst offender of all of this. And really, it's because they provided this alternate mode of Jamboree TV, and when you open up the game, you can either go into the Jamboree TV side, or you can go into the original game, which basically just puts you back into the Switch version. And there has been no frame rate or resolution bump if you're playing docked. If you're playing handheld, that 720p goes up to 1080p. Thanks for coming out. And that was not even included at launch, mind you. That was like a later update where they bumped it up to 1080p because everybody was like, what the hell is this? Anyway, so I don't know about everybody else, but when it comes to Mario Party, and I play Mario Party titles, and I think most people play Mario Party titles, you do it for the game boards and the mini games. All of the side modes, they're cute, they're a fun distraction, but I would say the vast majority of people that play Mario Party, they're doing it for the main Mario Party mode. So Jamboree TV in and of itself, at least for me, is not a selling point. It might be for others, but I doubt it. Of course, in saying that, now there's going to be comments of people saying that they never play the main mode and they only do the side modes, but I would wager that across the board, there's a reason this is the main mode that keeps coming back in every single Mario Party game. Now, we figured since we were playing the Switch 2 version of Mario Party Jamboree, we still wanted to do the main game mode, but we wanted to include all the mouse mini games. So we went into the Switch 2 edition version and we went into the basic party mode, and we're like, okay, this is going to be the same experience we always have, but now it's going to include mouse mini games into the rotation. But then we were met with new settings for this game mode. One of them was like a frantic last 5 turns mode. Basically, all of the settings that would normally apply when you get to the last 5 turns of a Mario Party game were just on by default. So like the red spaces and blue spaces were doubling coins, and if you land on somebody else's space, you can duel them. I thought this was really cool. It's a fun way to spice up the game. But then there was also a team mode where you can play the same main board game, but it's 2v2. So you share your coins, you share your stars, you share your items, and it's a little bit more competitive, adds a spin on the title. It's been done in previous Mario Party games, but this was new to Jamboree. So this was actually the game mode that we decided to play. We played in the mall level. I think it was called Rainbow Gallery or something like that. Honestly, we had a lot of fun because it's the same thing. It's the Mario Party Jamboree game that we already love, but it's adding a little bit of a spin to it to make it a little bit more exciting, a little bit more enticing. The interesting thing was when we finished, my brother was sitting there and he was like, yo, that was a lot of fun. We should all definitely buy the DLC for this so we can add this game mode into our base game. Now, my brother is a very casual gamer. He buys maybe one game every 3 or 4 years, and then he'll just join in on game nights whenever he's available, usually a couple times a month. It took me years to convince him to get an original Switch, and the only games he bought on there are Mario Party, so he can play online with us. Of course, this was before half of us decided to cancel our membership. So for him, the thought of paying $20 to upgrade Mario Party Jamboree is worth it. He doesn't spend that much money on the games, and he hasn't spent money on any game in a while. For him, $20 to get a few extra settings on a Jamboree game that'll make it a little bit more exciting when we play, it's worth it. But then I was like, no, actually, you can't actually get this DLC. You can't get these new game modes and settings unless you buy the Nintendo Switch 2. The look on my brother's face when I said this was hilarious. He's like, that makes no sense. How come you can't just spend the 20 bucks and then not have the mouse mini games and just get the additional settings on this game mode? And, you know, I laughed and thought about all of the dumb things that Nintendo has forced upon me in my life. And I was like, no, this is just like additional settings they added to the Switch 2 version of the game. And that was that. But then it got me thinking, and I'm like, hang on a second, like, for Animal Crossing, you get all of the additional content, but the additional Switch 2 edition stuff is just paying $5 for a graphics bump. How come Mario Party couldn't be the same way? How come they didn't just give people that bought Mario Party Jamboree, which is a game that is less than 1 year old, this update? Like, it's not even like this is a 5 or 10-year-old game where they wanted to offer people that just recently bought in something new. No, it's a game that's still within 1 year of launching. You added new features, all this new stuff in there, and the stuff that you added is not really needed to be locked behind a brand new system. Why am I, a paying customer, somebody that purchased Mario Party Jamboree day one, completely ignored for something this simple? Like, for the Jamboree TV stuff, I get it. You wanted to lock a whole brand new mode behind it, give people a justification for their new console, allow people to use their camera and all that other stuff. But like, just to add additional settings into the main game mode, you went out of your way to add it into the Switch 2 edition. Why couldn't that be included in the Switch 1 version? And now, especially after seeing what the Animal Crossing 1 owners are getting, I'm actually a little jealous. And honestly, it's added like a whole new layer of just how questionable and confusing this whole Switch 2 edition thing is, because it's so inconsistent. Like, for Metroid and for Animal Crossing, it's like better graphics and mouse controls, I think. For Pokemon, it's better graphics and frame rate. For Zelda, it's better graphics, better frame rate, an app. And for those games, it's $10. But then for Kirby, you get like a whole additional 2 or 3 hours of gameplay, which they're charging $20 for, which is absurd. And then for Mario Party, it's like a dumb side mode that's not even worth it. But the consistent thing on all of this stuff is you will not get a better performance or graphic improvement like you got with like the free update of Mario Odyssey, for example, unless you spend some money, even though the whole point of buying the Switch 2 in the first place was to get that better performance. I don't think people realized they were going to have to buy the better performance on many of their favorite titles. And look, obviously, the reason Nintendo is charging the prices that they are is because they believe they can get away with it. That's kind of their mantra across the board. Animal Crossing is $5 because they know that if they said $10, people would be like, are you insane? Why would I pay $10 to have this at a better resolution? Because it's Animal Crossing. Nobody really cares that much about that. But at $5, they get to put the game back on retail. People will see it, so they're likely to pay for it anyway, because it's not that much in their minds. But here's the thing. $5 is actually not that much. All things considered, I don't necessarily think I completely disagree with the $5 that they're charging for Animal Crossing. But that's in a vacuum if you're looking at it strictly from this Animal Crossing update. The reason I think there's an uproar for it, and there should be an uproar for it, is because of Nintendo's pricing policy being all over the place. Put it this way, I'm not saying this is something I would necessarily like, but if every single game that you wanted from the Switch 1, every one of those games that you wanted to perform better, have a better frame rate or resolution, and get that bump that you saw in Mario Odyssey and in these other games that got their bumps, if every one of those games just was like a very strict, if you pay $5, you get a Switch 2 edition version of this main game, I think I might actually be okay with that. So like, let's say Kirby and the Forgotten Land came out, it's got the Star-Crossed World thing in there, but you don't want to get the whole thing in there, but you're just like, okay, you can play the better mode for $5. I think I would be okay with that if that was just the price to upgrade your game across the board. Now, ideally, it should be free or included with Nintendo Switch Online at minimum, but this is actually better than what they're doing with their other titles. Like for Mario Wonder, for example, you're probably going to want to play that game with a frame rate and resolution bump, but you might not want all of the additional game modes that are coming with it. How come you can't just be like, you keep that, give me $5, I'll play this game at a better frame rate? And then likewise, I mean, somebody on Switch 1 could then buy into that Switch 2 DLC if they really wanted to. That would be a much better option than forcing somebody who has Super Mario Wonder and wants to play it with an improvement in performance and frame rate to have to spend $20 for a bunch of crap they don't want, when in reality, they just want the up-resed graphics. Now, this is unrelated, but that Mario Party Wonder game, I really hope it comes out at 120 frames per second, the Switch 2 edition of that game, because in the initial trailer, that was how they sold the frame rate thing. They showed Mario jumping, and then it was like, oh, this is 120 frames per second. So it'd be really funny if the first 2D Mario title to come out as a Switch 2 game, because a Switch 2 edition game is a Switch 2 game, right? Does not have the performance improved up to being 120 frames per second. But anyway, that's besides the point. And honestly, I don't know exactly what the point is of this whole conversation. It's confusing. And it should be confusing, because the way Nintendo has laid everything out has got people guessing and checking everything. You're throwing darts at a dartboard to figure out how your Switch 1 game is going to perform with the Switch 2. What do you have to spend? What are you getting out of that expenditure? If I have Nintendo Switch Online, will it be included? Why is it that some of the games where you're buying them off Best Buy, it says Switch 2 updates included, even though they're Switch 1 games? Right, that's the whole thing, is if you look at the BestBuy.com website, when they sell Switch 1 games that have got that Switch 2 edition free update, it actually has a note on there that it's like, oh, this game is going to perform better on your Switch 2. Like, how much research and searching does the casual audience have to do to figure out if their game is going to play better on the Switch 2 and whether or not they would actually have to spend money on it? And then you got a situation like Mario Party where it's like you could spend money on it, but it actually does not make your base game better. It adds a whole separate mode where over there, if you're playing on that, it's better, but if you're playing the original mode, it's not. And will there be more games like this? Just more questions and more confusion with every single Switch 2 edition release. And now with Animal Crossing, it's gotten even more confusing because sometimes they're $5 and the $5 gets you effectively basically nothing. And look, the overpriced Wii and Wii U ports that we got in the last generation, at the very least you can say they weren't confusing. Like, I think most people knew they were getting ripped off. Most people understood that Nintendo was reselling Wii U games because the Wii U failed and they needed to bring it back out again. And even if you were getting ripped off, it was kind of like, fine, I'll buy this, I guess. But at least you weren't confused. You spent the money, you got the game, and you played the game. The only people that are not confused about Switch 2 edition titles are the enthusiasts fandom. People like you and I, we know what they are, and even amongst us there's confusion. But that's the thing, the Switch 2 is a premium device for premium gamers, right? They're pricing everything at that jacked up price point, because the whole point of this thing is to just get people that are willing to drop as much money as they can on Nintendo to drop even more money on Nintendo, because the casual audience, the audience like my brother for example, will buy 1 or 2 games over the course of 3 years, and will probably buy them used because they're part of that casual Nintendo audience that buys their games used, either to resell them later or to gift them to kids later, whatever. But yeah, this whole experience over the course of this past week between the Animal Crossing announcement and then finally playing Mario Party and wondering why this update was not included in the main mode for the Switch 1 owners has just made the whole Switch 2 edition thing even more unnecessary and more confusing than it really needed to be at all. But anyway, that's all I really got to talk about right now. I had a fun time playing the Mario Party Jamboree Switch 2 edition at the very least. I wouldn't say those 2 settings are worth buying a $500 console for, nor paying a $20 upgrade fee for. But if you are somebody that owns a Switch 2 and you already own Mario Party Jamboree and it's like you have to play it and you're looking for something new and exciting on there, at the very least, those new game modes do provide some kind of mix-up into the gameplay if you play this game a lot. Whether or not it's worth $20 is a whole different discussion though. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you on the next one.